The final lesson of this Portuguese video series will review all types of irregular Portuguese verb conjugations. We start off with stem changes in the present tense. Several verbs undergo an E to I stem change in the present tense eu form alone. Some verbs apply the E to I stem change to all present tense forms except nos and vos, such as progredir, progrido, progrides, progride, progredimos, progredis, progride. Some verbs undergo an O to U stem change in the present tense eu form alone. The verbs sortir and polir apply the O to U stem change to all present tense forms except nos and vos. Surto, surtes, surte, sortimos, sortis, surte. Pulo, pules, pule, polimos, polis, pule. The verb extorquir has a Q to C spell change in the present tense eu form, and it may be regular or irregular in the other present tense forms, except nos and vos, in which it remains regular. Some verbs have a U to O stem change that applies to the tu and third person singular and plural present tense forms. For the verb subir, we have subo, sobes, sobe, subimos, subís, sobe. The verb fugir has a G to J spell change in the present tense eu form as well. Fujo, foges, foge, fugimos, fugis, foge. The stem change for entupir is optional. It may be regular or irregular in those three forms. Verbs ending in duzir and azer will simply remove the infinitive ir or er ending to form the third person singular present tense conjugation. There are a few verbs with irregular present tense eu forms that also simply remove the infinitive to create the third person singular present tense conjugation. Also notice that the verb requerer has an irregular present tense eu form, but the verb querer does not have an irregular present tense eu form. It only has an irregular third person singular present tense form. Verbs that end in ser have a cedilla in their present tense eu form. There are other verbs that undergo a consonant to C or cedilla spell change in the present tense eu form. Ger and gir verbs undergo a G to J spell change in their present tense eu form. The verbs emergir, convergir, and divergir also have an E to I stem change in their present tense eu form, as well as their G to J spell changes. Guir verbs and erguer remove the U in their present tense eu form, and notice that seguir also has an E to I stem change for the present tense eu form. Next are verbs that have irregular present tense endings, starting off with vir verbs such as diluir, diluo, dilui, dilui, diluimos, diluis, dilue. And here are some vir verbs which follow the same conjugational pattern. The verb delinquir may or may not have an accented I in all present tense forms except nos and vos. The accented I is optional in the other forms. The verbs construir and destruir may have alternate irregular forms with a U to O stem change, but this stem change is optional. Oer verbs have irregular present tense tu and third-person singular forms, such as the verb cojoer, cojo, cojois, cojoe, cojoemos, cojoes, cojoem. Here are some more examples of oer verbs. Air verbs have present tense irregularities in all forms except the third-person plural form. So for the verb sair, we have saiu, sais, sai, saímos, sais, saiem. Here are some more examples of air verbs. Ar verbs add an I prior to all present tense endings except for the nos and vos forms. So for the verb bloquear, we have bloqueo, bloqueas, bloquea, bloqueamos, bloqueáis, bloqueam. Some more examples of AR verbs. ER verbs add an EI prior to all present tense endings except in the nos and vos forms, such as the verb incendiar, incendeo, incendeas, incendea, incendiamos, incendiais, incendea. Here are a few more ER verbs. The verbs obsequiar and premiar may be conjugated regularly or irregularly. Some verbs have their own unique kinds of irregular present tense eu forms. It was mentioned earlier that the verb querer is regular in the present tense eu form, unlike requerer. But both verbs are irregular in the third person singular present tense form. And we have several verbs with unique and truly irregular present tense conjugations, starting off with remir. Remir adds a di prior to the m in all present tense forms except nos and vos. Regimo, regimes, regime, remimos, remis, regimem. Rir, rio, ris, ri, rimos, rides, rir. Sorrir follows the same pattern of conjugations as here. Sorrio, sorris, sorri, sorrimos, sorrides, sorriem. Ir, vão, vais, vai, vamos, ides, vão. Ser, sou, és, é, somos, sois, são. Estar, estou, estás, está, estamos, estais, estão. Dar has the same present tense endings as estar. Do, das, dá, damos, dais, dão. Ter, tenho, tens, tem, temos, tendes, tem. Vir has the same present tense endings as ter, except in the nos and vos forms. Venho, vens, vem, vimos, vindes, vem. Pôr, ponho, poes, poe, pomos, ponges, poe. Haver, ei, as, a, havemos, hemos, haveis, eis, ao. Ler, leio, les, lê, lemos, ledes, leem. Crer has the same present tense endings as ler. Creo, crees, cree, cremos, credes, cree. Ver, not to be confused with the IR verb vir. Vejo, vês, vê, vemos, vedes, vê. So ver has the same present tense endings as ler and crer, except in the present tense eu form. Luckily, there are only 4 Portuguese verbs that are irregular under the imperfect. Imperfect conjugations for ser. Era, eras, era, éramos, ereis, eram. Ter. Tinha, tinhas, tinha, tínhamos, tinhais, tinha. Vir has the same imperfect endings as ter. Vinha, vinhas, vinha, viamos, vinhais, vinham. Pôr. Punha, punhas, punha, punhamos, punhais, punham. Ir is actually conjugated regularly under the imperfect. It is simply replaced by the regular IR imperfect endings. Ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, iam. Verbs that end in car, gar, and sar undergo their own spell changes in the preterite eu form. Gar verbs have a C to QU spell change. Gar verbs have a G to GU spell change. And sar verbs remove the cedilla. The preterite eu forms for gar verbs with a C to QU spell change. The preterite eu forms for gar verbs with a G to GU spell change. And the preterite eu forms for sar verbs which remove their cedilla. There are several verbs with the irregular preterite ending e in the eu and third-person singular forms. The verbs estar and ter both undergo IV preterite stem changes in all forms except the third-person singular, in which they undergo an EV preterite stem change instead. The preterite conjugations for ter: tive, tiveste, teve, tivemos, tivestes, tiveram. And the preterite conjugations for estar follow the same pattern as ter: estive, estiveste, esteve, estivemos, estivestes, estivera. And estar, despite being an AR verb, takes the ER preterite endings, except in the first-person and third-person singular forms, which have the irregular E ending. The verbs haver, saber, caber, trazer, and prazer undergo A to OU preterite stem changes in all forms. Ove, oveste, ove, ovemos, ovestes, overá. Sobe, sobeste, sobe, sobemos, sobestes, soberá. Cove, coveste, cove, covemos, covestes, coverá. Trazer and prazer have their own spell changes which apply to all preterite forms as well. Trouxe, trouxeste, trouxe, trouxemos, trouxestes, trouxerá. Prove, proveste, prove, provemos, provestes, proverá. Poder undergoes an O to U preterite stem change in all forms except the third-person singular, in which the O takes a circumflex. Pude, pudeste, pode, pudemos, pudestes, puderá. The verb dizer undergoes a Z to double S preterite stem change in all forms. Disse, disseste, disse, dissemos, dissestes, disserá. And there are several verbs with their own unique and truly irregular preterite conjugations, starting off with fazer. Fiz, fizeste, fez, fizemos, fizestes, fizerá. The verb pôr. Pus, puseste, pós, pusemos, pusestes, pusera. The verb querer takes the preterite stem quis in all forms. Quis, quiseste, quis, quisemos, quisestes, quiseram. Now the verb requerer has regular preterite conjugations, unlike querer. The verb dar takes the er preterite endings except in its regular eu form. Dei, deste, deu, demos, destes, deram. Ver takes the ir preterite endings, although the preterite eu endings for er and ir verbs are identical. Vi, viste, viu, vimos, vistes, viram. Vir has uniquely irregular first and third person singular preterite forms. In the other forms, it undergoes an I to IE stem change. Vim, vieste, veio, viemos, viestes, vieram. The verbs ir and ser have identical and truly irregular preterite conjugations. Fui, foste, foi, fomos, fostes, foram. There are only 3 verbs in Portuguese that are irregular under the future and conditional. The future and conditional stems are irregular, but the endings remain regular. The future and conditional conjugations for fazer: farei, farás, fará, faremos, fareis, farão. Faria, farias, faria, faríamos, farieis, fariam. The future and conditional conjugations for dizer: girei, girás, girá, giremos, gireis, girão. Giria, girias, giria, giriamos, girieis, giriam. And the future and conditional conjugations for trazer: trarei, trarás, trará, traremos, trareis, trarão. Traria, trarias, traria, trariamos, trarieis, trariam. The vast majority of verbs, whether regular or irregular, form their present subjunctive stem by removing the o from their first-person singular present tense eu form. So we have the irregular verb ter. It is conjugated as tenho in the first-person singular present tense form. To form the present subjunctive stem, we remove the o. And then to this stem we add the usual er present subjunctive endings. The present subjunctive conjugations of ter: tenha, tenhas, tenha, tenhamos, tenhais, tenham. We start off with present subjunctive verbs with stem changes. Because these verbs have an e to I stem change in their first person singular present tense eu form, they also have an e to I stem change in their present subjunctive stem. There are other verbs with an I in their present subjunctive stems. The verbs saber and querer are not based on their first-person singular present tense forms. Verbs with an O to U stem change in their present subjunctive stems. These are the present subjunctive stems for the verbs poder, remir, vir, and sorrir. Next are verbs with spell changes in their present subjunctive stems, starting off with those verbs which add a cedilla. Other verbs have a consonant to C or cedilla spell change. Verbs with a G to J spell change. The verbs ser, estar, and haver have present subjunctive stems that end in j, and they are not based on their first-person singular present tense forms. And despite being an AR verb, estar will take the ER and IR set of present subjunctive endings. The present subjunctive conjugations of estar: esteja, estejas, esteja, estejamos, estejais, estejam. The present subjunctive stems for fazer, dizer, and trazer. The present subjunctive stems for ter, pôr, and vir all end in nh, and pôr will take the ER and IR set of present subjunctive endings. The present subjunctive conjugations for pôr: ponha, ponhas, ponha, ponhamos, ponhais, ponham. Guir verbs and erguer remove the U in their present tense eu form, so this also applies to their present subjunctive stems. And seguir also has an E to I stem change. Next are the present subjunctive stems for ir verbs which end in I. The present subjunctive stems for er verbs also end in I. Er verbs end in ei for their present subjunctive stems, although this is optional for the verbs obsequiar and premiar. The present subjunctive stems of gar, gar, and sar verbs are formed with the same spell changes as their respective preterite eu forms. The C to QU spell change for gar verbs, G to GU spell change for gar verbs, and the removal of the cedilla for sar verbs. The present subjunctive conjugations for the verb colocar with the C to QU spell change: coloque, coloques, coloque, coloquemos, coloqueis, coloquem. These are the present subjunctive stems for various gar verbs. The present subjunctive conjugations for castigar with a G to GU spell change: castigue, castigues, castigue, castiguemos, castigueis, castiguem. The present subjunctive stems for various gar verbs. The present subjunctive conjugations for começar with the removal of the cedilla: comece, comeces, comece, comecemos, comeceis, comecem. The present subjunctive stems for various sar verbs. We went over a few verbs whose present subjunctive stems are not based on their first-person singular present tense forms. And keep in mind that estar takes the ER and IR set of present subjunctive endings despite being an AR verb. The present subjunctive conjugations of dar: de, des, de, demos, deis, dem. And dar is only irregular in the present subjunctive due to accent modifications and the addition of an E in its third-person plural form. And the present subjunctive conjugations of ir: va, vas, va, vamos, vades, vau. To form the stem for the imperfect subjunctive and future subjunctive, verbs will take their third-person plural preterite form and remove the aram, eram, or iram ending. And to this stem we add the imperfect subjunctive or future subjunctive endings afterwards. And the only verbs that are irregular under the imperfect subjunctive or future subjunctive are those verbs that are irregular in the preterite third-person plural form. These are verbs who have irregular third-person plural preterite forms, and from those forms we derive the irregular imperfect subjunctive, and future subjunctive stem. The verb ver will take the ir endings in the imperfect subjunctive and future subjunctive. All of the other verbs, including estar, dar, and por, will take the er endings. These are the imperfect subjunctive and future subjunctive conjugations for ver, and remember it is the only one of these verbs that takes the ir endings. Vise, vises, vise, visemos, viseis, visem. Vir, vires, vir, virmos, virges, virem. The rest of these verbs take the er endings under the imperfect and future subjunctive, such as por. Pusese, pusesses, pusesse, pusessemos, pusesseis, pusessem. Puser, puseres, puser, pusermos, puserges, puserem. And one more example, the verb prazer. Pruvesse, pruvesses, pruvesse, pruvessemos, pruvesseis, pruvessem. Pruver, pruveres, pruver, pruvermos, pruverges, pruverem. The verbs ir and ser are identical in the preterite, so they are also identical in the imperfect and future subjunctive. They also have irregular endings for both the imperfect subjunctive and future subjunctive. The imperfect subjunctive and future subjunctive conjugations for the verbs ir and ser. Fosse, fosses, fosse, fossemos, fosseis, fossem. For, fores, for, formos, forges, forem. We know that the imperative mood only applies to tu, você, nós, vós, and vocês. And we know that only the affirmative tu and vos commands are not based on the present subjunctive. Affirmative tu commands are based on the third person singular present tense form, and affirmative vos commands remove the s from their respective present tense forms. For command forms under the imperative mood, any irregularities for affirmative tu and vos commands will be identical to any irregularities that they have in the present tense, but with the s removed for vos commands. And any irregularities for all other commands will be based on the same irregularities that they have in the present subjunctive. These are some affirmative tu commands who are irregular in their third person singular present tense forms. These are the affirmative vos command forms of those verbs. Many of these verbs are regular in their present tense vos form, but the irregular ones include ir, por, ter, ver, and vir. All other affirmative commands and all negative commands will simply follow the same irregularities that they have in the present subjunctive. The verb ser has uniquely irregular affirmative tu and vos commands, se and sege. These are not based on the present tense forms, but it will still follow the present subjunctive irregularities in all other commands. Most irregular past participles don't really follow any specific pattern. You'll just have to memorize them on your own. A large number of verbs have separate forms for their past participle and their adjective. For those verbs that have two past participles, the regular past participle is used when the auxiliary verb is ter or haver, when forming compound verbs in perfect tenses. The irregular past participle is used if the auxiliary verb is ser, estar, or ficar. And the irregular past participles are used as adjectives to describe nouns. The verb fugir has two irregularities in the present tense. It undergoes a U to O stem change in the tu form and the third person singular and plural forms, and it undergoes a G to J spell change in the eu form. The verb caer in the present tense eu form and in all present subjunctive forms undergoes an O to U stem change and a Q to C spell change. The verb estorquir follows the same pattern as retorquir, but it may also undergo an O to U stem change in the present tense tu and third person singular and plural forms. The verbs emergir, convergir, and divergir in the present tense eu form and in all present subjunctive forms undergo an E to I stem change and a G to J spell change. The verb seguir in the present tense eu form and in all present subjunctive forms will undergo an E to I stem change, and it will remove the U in those forms. The verbs construir and destruir have irregular present tense endings in some forms. And in addition to those irregular endings, they have an optional U to O stem change in the tu and third person singular and plural present tense forms. There are several verbs with irregular preterite endings, preterite spell changes, and preterite stem changes. All of them are detailed in the irregular preterite verbs section, and we're not going to re-review them here. These first few groups of verbs have accent modifications in the present tense and present subjunctive. These verbs have an acute accent over the I in all present tense and present subjunctive forms except nos and vos. The verb arcaizar as an example. The verbs cohibir and prohibir have grave accents over the I. These verbs have an accent over the U, using the verb saudar as an example. Boiar has an optional accent over the O. Aguar and its derivatives have an optional accent over the A. The verb por removes the circumflex in the future and conditional. Oer verbs have an accented I in the imperfect, in the preterite eu form, and in their past participles. Using corroer as an example. Huir and air verbs have an accented I in the imperfect, in all preterite forms except the third person singular. In all imperfect subjunctive forms, the future subjunctive tu and third person plural form, and in their past participles. The verb diluir. And the verb sair. Prefixed variations of irregular verbs will follow the same conjugational patterns as the irregular verbs upon which they are based. The only difference is that this time you attach the prefix prior to each irregular conjugation. Some of the most common irregular verbs with prefixed variations are those verbs based on fazer, dizer, vir, ter, pôr, guir and ler, pedir, torcer, seguir, and cobrir. Now, to quickly go over some of these examples, the verb fazer will follow the same irregularities as fazer. Contra dizer will follow the same irregularities as dizer. Intervir follows the same pattern as vir. Manter follows the same irregularities as ter. Expor follows the same irregularities as pôr. Descrer and herer will take on the irregularities of guir and ler, respectively. Despedir follows the irregularities of pedir. Contorcer will follow the irregularities of torcer, but its past participle and the past participles of other torcer-based verbs are regular and are not based on the irregular past participle torto. Conseguir follows the same irregularities as seguir. And for the last example, encobrir follows the same irregularities as cobrir. We have now completed this review of irregular Portuguese verb conjugations, and we have also completed this Portuguese video series as a whole. I again apologize for any mispronunciations I may have, as I am not a Portuguese speaker. As I always say, I would very much appreciate it if you could please do me a favor and share this video series with your friends and teachers. And that is all for now, so until next time.